Welcome to the Time to Practice Summer Edition. This series is meant to give you a little weekly burst of inspiration, motivation, or food for thought about music learning and music practice for young musicians each week before we restart Season 4 in September. You'll hear tips from past expert guests, listeners, and even, I hope, tips from young musicians themselves this year, and I can't wait to share them with you. Whenever you listen to this episode, whether it's in the summer or throughout the year, I hope these episodes speak to you and give you actionable advice that you can use. This episode is brought to you by my resources for teachers and families. I have 3 books about music practice available, especially about music practice with young students or students just learning how to practice, and you might find those helpful. Beyond the Music Lesson, Positive Practice, which is a workbook for problem solving in the early stages of practice, and Music Practice Makeover. You can find links to purchase any of these books at suzukitriangle.com/books. And anytime you purchase one of those resources, you help support the work I do, especially the work of this podcast. Thanks for your support. You're listening to episode 135. The topic of perfectionism, especially related to music learning, and developing musicians, is such an important one. And thankfully, it's one I see being talked about more and more. Of course, that could partially be my own algorithm that I've created because of my interest in the topic, but at the very least, since Claire Allen and I presented on supporting perfectionists at the ASTA conference in 2025, and some of the follow-up articles that have been written about that presentation or that we have published, we have gotten a lot of great engagement and interest from many of you. And that's why we're so excited to be back today to record a conversation 1 year later, reflecting on what we've been thinking about, working on, and learning since the series first aired last summer. You can find links to listen to the original series of episodes on the topic at suzukitriangle.com/perfectionist. I'll also add some links in the show notes to find other resources that we created for you as well. We want to remind you, as we did when the series first came out, that we are not trying to label anyone as perfectionist or not perfectionist, and we're being very conscious to stay in our lane as music educators and musicians who think about practice in this way. We're not mental health professionals, and none of what we say is meant to be a mental health advice. Our goal is to better understand perfectionism and perfectionist thinking, and to discuss strategies for music learning and music practice that can help us as musicians, parents, caregivers, teachers, and any combination of those categories we might fall into. All right, let's dive in. Well, welcome everyone. I'm excited to be back with Claire Allen today. Those of you who heard our Perfectionist series last summer, or maybe the refresher from last week on the podcast, might remember that we talked a lot about the topic of perfectionism and perfectionist thinking. And we're excited to be back today, a year later, to share some of our reflections and thoughts since first recording that series. So, Claire, thank you for being here.
Yeah, excited to be back.
Could you just give a brief introduction for those who have not met you before, or maybe who need a refresher, just about where you're calling in from or talking to us from, and what you do in the world of music?
Sure. My name is Claire. I'm a longtime listener, multiple time caller here, calling from the Northern Virginia, DC area, where it's currently horrendously hot outside. I play and teach the violin, and my favorite type of music to play is string quartet. And I truly don't have a favorite or least favorite age to teach. Currently, my studio ranges from almost 5, she told me, to about to turn 18 somehow. And an alarming number of them are starting to drive, and everything in the middle. And every time I teach something, I go, oh, I really love teaching little kids Wii violin. And then, oh, I really love working with my teenagers. So I think I really do enjoy teaching everyone.
I love that. Yes, we have a similar age range in our studios, and there's just delightful things about all those ages and stages, which is so fun. Well, a year ago, we recorded this multi-part series about perfectionism and perfectionist thinking for musicians, not just students, but ourselves, maybe parents of musicians, caregivers of musicians. And we presented a conference talk at ASTA on this topic, and then we wrote an article that was published in the Strad, which was very exciting.
Was that just last year?
It was last year.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
What is time?
right, right. In some ways, yeah, it's hard. Yeah, exactly. The time zooms by. And I don't know about you, Claire, but I just received a lot of feedback from people about this topic. Wherever they heard us talk about it, or one of us or both of us talk about it, it seemed like a topic people want to hear about and want to talk about. Did you get a lot of response on your end as well?
Yeah, I got some really kind emails after asked. I mean, I had people come up to me after the conference and say like, "Hey, do you want to go for coffee and exchange life stories?" And of course, I love that. And yeah, I don't know if any of my studio was aware of any of it, or none of them talked to me about it if they did, which is totally fine if you're listening, guys. No hard feelings. We talk about enough. But yeah, I think it definitely provoked some interesting conversations. I think my favorite was when a colleague and friend of ours had said that he came to our session just to like support us, and then halfway through he was like, "I'm going to take some notes here. This is really good." So that was particularly gratifying.
Exactly, exactly. And I just heard a lot of like, oh, thank you for saying this. Or it's particularly, I think we talked a lot about how maybe the most useful advice for us as musicians about perfectionism or perfectionist thinking is not the advice to lower your standards or quote recover from perfectionism, but we want those high standards. If you're a surgeon or a doctor, or you engineer and build bridges, for example, all of those fields need people with high standards and exacting, precise standards. And also, how do we take care of ourselves or support our humanity in that process? I feel like that's just something that resonated with a lot of people.
And I think just talking about it as though it's a normal part of a personality as opposed to a condition, and it's something that you live with and you manage just like you would anything else. I think often in our extensive research of Instagram memes, some of they're kind of harsh. There's, perfectionists are not the fun ones. If anyone's into like astrology or whatever, I'm a Virgo, which means my birthday's in September, which is basically the perfectionist type. So whenever I see those like scroll for your birth month, it's like, oh, this is like the least fun personality to be. So I think just like being in a room full of people and saying like, hey, this is okay. This is something that a lot of people deal with, and it's not bad, and it's not something that needs to be fixed. And it is something that you can use to your advantage.
Right, right. And I think also on the flip side of that, for educators or parents or caregivers, how we might interact with our young musician in our lives who tends
Mm-hmm.
this way has a really big impact. And we want to be, I think, cautious or proceed with care so that we're not reinforcing, I don't know, habits or ways of thinking and talking to oneself that could be damaging long term. Not that any of it's our fault, but we talked in our series just about when we notice some of these patterns from our students or our children, being careful, how we speak to them or proceeding with some caution there. I think that's the other thing that struck a lot of people.
Or maybe as the adults, especially for me as a teacher, working to manage my own perfectionism happening in the lesson, or if I become aware of a particular tendency in a parent, again, not trying to like armchair diagnose them here, but when a parent comes in and tells me that they've made their child practice every single note with a tuner, like the needle tuner, and this is like a 7-year-old, it's like, I totally understand you have a high standard for pitch, but can we work about on the bow arm?
Right.
So, certain guiding people toward certain mental frameworks or practice strategies that will be more effective for them.
One of the things we want to do today is just share what have we done ourselves, or both reflected on, which we're sharing, but also tangibly when we're working with students and families and ourselves, what are a couple things that have changed for us? And when you said that, Claire, I was just thinking about now when I see that you're describing come into the studio a parent with high standards and really just trying to help their child
Absolutely.
be a good musician, right? It comes from such a good place. I feel like now because we've done all this research and had all these conversations, I can both affirm like your high standards are not wrong, or you don't need to loosen them. And also, let's look at the big picture of how a student's going to develop
Mm-hmm.
into those standards without crushing their spirit or their motivation or their love of music. And we can have that conversation of both and I feel like I just have a better way to talk to people now that we've done some of this research.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've really incorporated is all those really handy phrases that you shared to say. So things like, I love seeing you figure it out, or look at your brain figuring that out, look at you learning here, that's why we practice. I've definitely really tried to affirm that whenever we do something new and the student isn't good at it yet. I said, "Oh, that's so good that we're learning something." So I've really tried to say that. I would say, in terms of age groups, I think my teens are the most skeptical about that. They really don't like being bad at things. So we're working on that. The younger kids seem to be like, "Oh, cool, I'm learning." So yeah, I think, but having those phrases just handy and looking for opportunities to be able to use them in a really authentic way, I think has been really helpful to make sure that I'm really, really praising that process.
Right. And I think of myself too. Sometimes I think of picking up a hobby, or
Ooh.
we just saw this fantastic mandolin concert and I was like, "Oh, I tried to learn the mandolin during the pandemic. Maybe I should pick that back up." And then I just remembered how clumsy I was at playing it and how frustrated I got that I wasn't instantly good, and I was like, "Oh."
Yeah.
And so I can see where the teenagers are coming from, right? It just can feel like, "Oh, can like that silly cartoon with the chicken. It's like, can I just get to the part where I'm good and skip all this hard stuff?"
Okay, side talk about the mandolin. You can totally cut this out if you want to. I have also tried to play the mandolin. I have one in the other room. My frustration is that my left hand transfers fine because I'm a violinist,
Yes.
but the strumming and the pick and the how do you deal with the two strings, like that, so it frustrates me that like the speed of my left hand and my right hand is very different. So I should probably pick that back up and give myself the perspective of not being good at something yet. Because it's a
It
great
is. And I like
instrument.
see people play it well and I'm like, "Oh, I so want to do that." And then yes, exactly what you just said, which I think is just it is helpful for us to capture that feeling and remember. Our teens or our students, if we're parents, right, might be feeling some of those things.
Right. And I think for our younger students, like their primary job is learning and exploring new things. So it's so easy to be in that mindset and everyone encourages them. And I do think that the older you get, people expect you to have found the thing that you're good at and that starts to become part of your identity. And I don't know, for me, the older I get, the it's much harder to do new things mentally. And I will sit here on this podcast and say how good it is, and then I'm gonna go the rest of my day and use my practice strategies that work for me and stay in my box.
Yes. Yes. Giving ourselves permission that something is not there yet. Sounds easy in theory, and boy, it can be emotionally hard sometimes. That's one of the things that I know you talked about a lot in our conversations that I think is really, really important is just validating those feelings and letting the student, ourselves, whoever it is, feel them and not trying to decide we quote should feel something else, or if we have that high standard, we just have it, and trying to get people to let it go is really not the thing. I think we make a lot more progress when we embrace the standard and also wrestle with where we are and try to make peace with that.
And I think being aware of the emotional effort that goes into all of this too, I think from the outside or for someone who maybe doesn't have as many perfectionistic tendencies, it can be really easy to say like, "Oh, just calm down," which has never ever helped. Or you don't have to take it so seriously, or it doesn't have to be so good. And I think really understanding the internal sense of struggle and urgency it can feel, especially if you're at an age where feelings are feeling more intense, which is probably all of us to some extent. I've definitely, I think I did this before our presentation too, because I know I talked about it, but I've been trying to do it more on purpose since, which is whenever someone, I ask a lot of questions in my teaching. So, if someone plays something for me, my first response is going to be, "So what do you think?" And I've learned I've been doing this for a few years now. Shout out to James Hutchins, my Suzuki trainer, who really taught like this. And that's like one of the biggest things I took away from doing Suzuki training with him is it really stops the cycle of student plays, teacher hands down judgment, and it makes it much more of a conversation. And since I started doing it, I've had some students who have been in my studio that whole time, and our conversations and lessons have definitely gotten much more detailed. They're coming in and they know I'm going to ask them, and they're noticing really specific things versus new students who are "Oh, I don't know." And it just reinforces that this level of self-analysis and like critical thinking can be taught. which I think is really important. But usually early on in the process, someone will say something like, oh, it needs to be better, or it wasn't perfect yet. And I really try to say, okay, well, what didn't you like about that? To be as specific as possible about what the thing is, because it's not good doesn't actually mean anything, because good is a highly subjective observation and it doesn't mean anything. And you could think it's good and it could actually sound horribly scratchy and out of tune. You could think it's terrible and it could sound identical to Hilary Hahn on the Suzuki recording, you know? So I try to get them to be very specific about what they didn't like. And I also subscribe to a philosophy, which is that if we want to change how we sound, we have to change how we move our bodies. So then I'll talk very specifically about how to move the body to change the sound and encourage them to experiment with a few different things. And so the faster I can move them off of what does good mean, that makes it much more effective, I found. But it's a long process, and it would be much easier as a teacher, sure, just to sit there and say, okay, measure 3, wrong bowing. Measure 5, add a tune. Measure 7, where was your fourth finger? Like, and I mean, I still have to do some of that, of course, but I try to start with that conversation. And whatever they say they want to work on first, I address that because I want them to be in a habit of, okay, how can I, figure out what to work on in a productive way, as opposed to just saying it doesn't sound good and melting down.
Right. And I did long-term training with Martha Shafford, and we talked about something similar, from a different maybe angle of why we're doing it. But definitely if a student is worried that something else is not going well, and then we're addressing this other thing over here, it can be sort of frustrating for them to practice. So I do think also it motivates the student to know my teacher is going to help me solve this thing that's frustrating me. But what you said when we had our conversations last year really stuck with me, and I've told a few people about this, is just when a student says it's terrible, that, you mentioned it a minute ago, but it's asking them, okay, why? Because I think parents tell me when I bring that up that they feel like the good thing to do as the parent is to convince them like it wasn't so bad, or like give them a pep talk kind of. And actually, maybe the student needs the opposite. They need someone to be like, I see what you mean, or I hear that you're frustrated with that, right? And then let's solve that thing instead of talking them out of their feelings about it, or what they're noticing.
Well, and I think that, you know, in life, there are objectively things that we should feel negative about, because if you didn't feel badly about it, that would make you like a psychopath. um, which I understand is a genuine clinical diagnosis for a very small percentage of the population. Not a mental health professional here, but the ability to feel the full spectrum of human emotions is like one of the things we're here on this planet to do. And when you see things like horrendous suffering, or you experience loss, or some horrible harm is done to you, we should feel sad or angry or frustrated. And I mean, obviously playing out of tune in a violin lesson is not on the same scale as that, but how we learn to respond to that. Like, yes, you have these feelings, and, that's okay. And then you move on from it. And at least for me, as a highly emotional creature, having friends who I would say would describe themselves as more logical, maybe. We've had conversations over the years where it's just like, no, if you just like say like, hey, that's really sucks, and I'm really sorry that you're dealing with that or going through it, I'm gonna go, oh, yeah, it was. And then I might not even need problem solving, but if you're like, oh no, that wasn't so bad, like blah blah blah, then I feel like I have to defend my emotions, and it can actually escalate the conversation. So in, a violin lesson, if you're like, the parent goes, no, that wasn't terrible, and the kid goes, no, I heard something. I mean, we can all always improve our playing. We don't want to create the type of person who can't hear room for improvement in their playing. So I think, it seems like this
Right.
really small thing, but I don't think our job as teachers and as adults in students' lives is to protect them from ever feeling anything bad. I think it's to make it find a safe place for having those feelings, and hopefully turn them into the type of adults who can work through those feelings in healthy and productive ways as they evolve.
Absolutely. And as you're talking, I'm thinking of some conversations I've had with parents where they just see that their child might hit the breaking point and totally melt down if they start to feel super negative about whatever is going on. And we really just start to feel like, okay, I'm going to try to save them from the meltdown. And I do want to say, when I was reflecting on, what do I want to think? What have I been thinking about since last year when we recorded this? It's just sometimes there needs to be some outside support beyond what you as the parent
Mm-hmm.
know or can come up with to do, or what the teacher can suggest to do. Um, and if we, access to mental health care is challenging for a lot of people for a lot of reasons. So we want to acknowledge that. There's also books you can read, or, other experts online you can find access to get yourself some help in the meantime. But sometimes what we're talking about is beyond what any of us are trained to do, as parents or teachers. We might need some outside support for some of these intense reactions.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, I'm a violin teacher, but this goes for any music. Like, it's never just the violin. Like, if there's issues going on in violin lessons, it almost never has to do with the violin. It has to do with feelings or time management or managing, different things about how our brains work or feelings or external forces. It's almost never about the
Right.
violin.
Right.
The violin can be a great symptom, but it's almost never about that.
Right. So we just want to encourage you, if you're a parent or caregiver practicing with your child and you're doing all the things that you've heard us talk about, that you've read experts talk about, there could be a point where getting some outside support for your child could be really helpful. And that can feel like a hard step sometimes to decide as a parent. I'll say, as a parent with grown kids. And also, I think the more we can get our kids tools, or I just thought, like, if my kids feel like if they're having a struggle, they know getting into some therapy could help them. I feel like that alone is a good life skill, assuming we have access
Yeah.
to that. Yeah.
And I've had a few students over my time who have had external support in that way, and I've definitely seen it be very helpful and positive for them if you find the right person, of course.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but I have seen changes happen over time through different types of supports and coachings and things like that.
What else have you been reflecting on, Claire?
I guess I've got two more things that I was kind of thinking about. I've made a very deliberate, and this was actually inspired a little bit by what you said in multiple sessions about neurodivergence, which is, you're going to have to remind me of the statistic. I can never remember the number because it's so staggeringly huge, which is that a neurodivergent child will receive X number more of like negative comments or corrections than a neurotypical child. So what was that number again?
So I have to, like, I'm just going off my memory, so I'll have to fact check myself. But I think it was specifically ADHD students, and it was 20,000 extra corrective comments by the age of 12. And they only measured, by the way, the school day, not getting ready for school in the morning, not the weekend, nothing outside of school hours. So I think you could easily double that, to be honest.
Right. So thinking about that and how it takes, I think, tremendous strength of will as an adult to not let what people say about you or to you affect your self image. And it's even more challenging as a child or as an adolescent. So, something I've been very deliberately trying to do in lessons, and students, families, if you're listening to me and you're like, she doesn't do that all the time, I'm working on it. I'm not perfect. I'm a work in progress. Hopefully, I'm continuing to improve. But I'm very specifically trying to use the word you or the student's name for when I'm giving really positive feedback and really saying, oh my gosh, you sounded so good there. Do you hear what you did? I really try to make a big deal about positive feedback in that way. And as much as I can when I'm giving feedback about something that I see needs to be changed or developed or built on or just frankly fixed, I try to use very impersonal pronouns. So it's the second finger needs to be low there. Not you need to put your second finger low, or the left arm needs to come under the instrument more so you can reach your fourth finger, or the tone was kind of scratchy there. I'm definitely not perfect about it. I'd like to think I do this a higher percentage of the time than I used to, but just thinking about that, there's a very good chance that what I'm saying is really affecting my students' opinion of their own playing. I think I'm trying to really build up their positive self image by genuinely saying the things that they're good at and making that personal, and then making the fixes less personal. And I think it's working. Probably, results may vary, but that's something I've been really trying to do.
I do think when we're teachers, we might work with a student for quite a number of years, we do have a big impact. Just like if you're the parent or caregiver and you're practicing with your child every day, we're saying things to them every day about their playing. I do think as conscious as we can, we are not perfect. Like you said, we're all works in progress. And I think the parent job might be more challenging than our teacher job because you're just with your child 24/7 and we're tired and all those things that make it more challenging. But I do think being as conscious as we can about language
Mm-hmm.
makes such a big difference. And I realize I think about it just like, how am I talking to myself, honestly,
Mm-hmm.
um, in the same way. Like, I don't know if you've worked on your own self talk, but
Comes and goes.
yeah,
I I will say I was super grateful for this mindset. So you know this because we've talked about this personally. Very long story short, my cat was diagnosed with glaucoma this summer. She's in a stable condition now. We've had an amazing care team for her, but the upshot of it is that we have to give her eye drops 3 times a day. This is the new skill I didn't think I needed to develop, and the stakes were pretty high because her ocular pressures were very high when we started treatment. So it was get the drop in the cat's eye or she stays in pain and her health deteriorates. And the first week was, so I kept saying, this is new. You've never given a cat eye drops before. She's never had to have eye drops before. Neither of you is supposed to be good at this yet, but you're going to practice and you're going to get some information on techniques of how to do it. And, you know, a month later, I now have a technique of more or less sitting on my cat and putting the drop in, and we're good. So, well, she might beg to differ, but it's just like a little thing where it was a really stressful situation. I'm not saying I sailed through this very steadily emotionally, but I was really grateful for that mentality because I could see an earlier iteration of myself having like a complete meltdown around this versus this is a skill that I don't have yet. And I'm going to acquire it because, well, I have to.
yeah. Well, that's a great example of using this in action. And I think anything we're doing with our instrument, practicing with our child, working with our students, like everything is a skill. And we're
Mm-hmm.
just, some students come to us with some skills, or our own children just have some skills already fully baked, and others, there's going to be a lot of skill building. And we don't really know what that's going to be till we're in the practice space with them or in the lesson with them.
Yep.
Yeah,
Well, speaking of practice, I feel like I'm like a missionary for this book or whatever, which is Molly Gebrian's Learn Faster, Perform Better.
absolutely.
I refer to the chapter on playing faster so much. It's chapter 16. Um, so I tell my students, like, in chapter 16 of the Holy Book, verse whatever, use the chart of different rhythms to practice this passage. But it's been so helpful for me. She explains the neuroscience of learning in very colloquial terms. So I am not a brain scientist. That is not my area of study or expertise, but I found it really engaging and interesting to read and very easy to understand. And especially being able to differentiate between, like, am I encoding new information or am I retrieving information that's already in there has been very helpful for me in my own practice. And I think when you start to think about practice in this sort of way, it really helps you get it out of the binary, I sounded bad, I need to practice more. Because my other question I ask my students a lot is, so what's your plan? And sometimes they'll be like, practice more? Okay. How are you going to practice? Practice better? What does that mean? So I think developing a language around what is effective and what is your goal and what is going to be effective, I think that also helps as well. And I think talking to them about their brains. I made all of my teenagers read this book. To what level they've read it, I'm not sure. I told at least one to reread it this summer. I'm just like, just go read this again. It's like 5 million free lessons once you buy it. But saying, like, this is how your brain learns is, again, I think there's a level of depersonalization that makes it go, oh, well, my brain will do this if I do this. I think that's also been really helpful for us. And I know you had her on this podcast when the book came out, but if anyone out there has not read this book, the best tip I could give you for your personal practice, for honestly understanding how anyone learns anything ever, even if you're a parent who's not a musician, or if you're a student listening, like, read Molly Gebrian's Learn Faster, Perform Better. That's like if I could give, I've even started mentioning this when I get inquiries for new students, like, well, they may or may not study with me, but like, read this book. If nothing else, read this book.
So good. Yes, fantastic. It's so great. And just something you can go back to over.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much in there that you could just go in and pick up new layers of it or new ideas or
Or you could just read one chapter of it and just try that. So yeah, that's been a really big shift for me and my own personal practice for sure.
yeah. And I think, you're talking a lot about teens and so I guess I'll give a opposite age range view, but I just end up talking to a lot of families with younger beginners because of the work I do doing workshops and everything.
Mm.
And I think some of the things that I found that help with thinking about perfectionist thinking, but just in general, is that big picture perspective, just zooming way out because we can get really bogged down in the tiny details and worrying about it's not going perfectly at these early stages versus if you can zoom way out
Mm-hmm.
and realize a lot of these things are skills like we're talking about and we're going to build them and maybe just the skill of tolerating frustration or the emotions that come with not getting it on the first time. That could be for you as the parent or caregiver, and it could be for your child. It could be for both. But just anytime we can just zoom out, like, why are we doing this? What are we learning? And like you said, then we can find strategies versus having to just find judgments like good or bad or perfect or not perfect. Like, okay, all of that, we might feel all those things or notice all those things, but really we're going to make progress when we figure out what do we do about the fact that we're not quite there yet, which I think we never are as musicians.
Mm-hmm.
So what do we do with that?
Yeah, and I think especially with those youngest students, I've tried to really redefine what a violin lesson looks like.
Mm,
Because with those little ones, it does not look like them walking in and unpacking their instrument carefully and not flinging it on the floor. I mean, hopefully it does. But, and then standing there and doing everything I tell them for 20, 30 minutes. Like, that's not what we're doing. And I have a whole bunch of things that I work with, but we might sit on the floor and sing, we might sit on the floor and clap, we might dance around the room, we might read a storybook, we might play one little thing on the violin, we might make a bow hold, and that sort of stuff adds up over time. And I think especially for the grown-ups who are helping those little kids, I think maybe especially if they grew up in maybe a more authoritarian style of parenting, this might look radically different to what they expected when they signed their kid up for music lessons. So sometimes I worry I've gone too far the other direction where I'm just like, no, this is fine. It's like, no, I promise, like, I'm a professional, I have a plan. I'm just like, this is fine, this is typical for 5-year-olds.
well, and I think it's like developmentally appropriate
Oh,
teaching, right?
sure.
So yeah,
I
yeah.
would be actually either very surprised and potentially like a little worried if I had a 5-year-old who just stood there like a little robot and only did everything I said. Be like, can we go outside? Can we go run around a little bit? Maybe we don't need more violin lessons here.
Yeah, yeah, I hear you. So, yeah, I agree. It's sometimes we have a picture of what practice looks like for older kids or for ourselves if we're musicians, and then remembering kids are going to learn like kids sometimes, and it's a process. I wanted to share, speaking of Molly Gabrian's book, like 100% add that to your list if you have not read that yet. It's so good. I also had two books I wanted to share today that I've read since our first conversations, and I've probably talked to you about them, Claire, but one is called How to Be Enough by Ellen Hendrickson. The subtitle is Self Acceptance for Self Critics and Perfectionists.
Ooh. Well, I feel triggered just hearing that title, which means I should probably read it.
It's so good. So Alan Duncan, who was a Suzuki parent, his daughter's older now, recommended it to me after listening to our podcast series. He said he's
Aw, thanks,
yes,
Alan.
exactly. He's fantastic, and he said he read it twice. It was so good. And there's even a chapter that starts with a story about a Suzuki violinist. So it's so
Yes.
good. It's such a good book, and it's really that self acceptance is so helpful because it does talk about just how do we take care of ourselves as human beings when we have these really high standards. I thought it was an excellent book, so I would recommend that one. And then another book because I went down this rabbit hole. This author recommended a bunch of other books, and I read one for myself called "Please Yourself: How to Stop People Pleasing and Transform the Way You Live." I realize for myself that I have the people pleasing type of perfectionism along with other types I think, but the
Mm.
I want to show up perfectly. I want to make people perfectly happy. I want to teach the perfect lesson or, make the perfect podcast episode or whatever it is. And it's good to have high standards for myself, but also I can really like abandon what I need in the process because I'm trying to make everyone else happy. Or sometimes I don't actually hold people to standards that I should because I'm trying to make them happy instead. I've really been working the last year. I've been on a deep dive to work on this for myself. So this book was very good about pleasing yourself. And it's kind of
Mm.
not that you have to become suddenly selfish. Like I'm never not going to care about other people. And I
No, of course not.
think it's my superpower in a way, but the author is just talking about how do you care, like put yourself on an equal plane with others, not above other people, but like, can you consider yourself as well? So if anybody's listening and feels like the people pleasing side of perfectionism might be you, that book was really helpful for me. I did a lot of thinking about that one. That was good.
Well, and that's something we haven't really touched on today, but when you said that, that was really striking to me when we first started the research that people pleasing is a form of perfectionism, where you might not have the thing where all your shoes have to be lined up or all the notes have to be in tune or everything has to be just so. It might not look like that, but it might look like, everyone has to be happy with me at all times or things like that. I think it's very weird because in many elements of my life, I don't feel that I have that. And then in certain elements of my life, I have started being like, oh, maybe I am a little bit like with certain people. I don't care
Right.
about mass appeal. I don't think. If you all want to like me, that's great. I'm not going to say no to that to the world. But there's definitely like certain people that I'm really close to in my life where if they're not happy with me for whatever reason or they're thinking what I'm doing is a bad idea, then like I'm going to really feel that intensely and like question myself even if like I know it's something that's good for me.
And all of this happens in a range, right? And I think probably everybody feels that to some extent. And I think we want to be really careful if that's sort of crippling us or our ability to go through life, right?
Well, and that's something that I will see that in the studio too, which this might not be the type of student who comes in and has meltdowns because they get it wrong, but I can think of some students I've had over the years where they come in and like everything is organized and they're always pleasant and they're always smiling and I never see them express any negative emotion or frustration. And sometimes that's a little challenging as a teacher to manage too because it's like, well, I want to know if I'm upsetting you. I want to know if you don't like this song as much as others. You're still going to have to play it, but you don't have to like it.
Right.
So I think that's another way that it can show up in the teaching studio. And sometimes it's the parent, sometimes, or the guardian, sometimes it's the kid, sometimes it's both of them. And that's really interesting to look at too.
Because a student could just be very compliant and eager to please us, and that could make them easy to teach or easy to practice with if we're the parent or caregiver. But then if their self worth or sense of self is just about other people only, that can just cause some problems down the line. So we want to be aware, I think, that people pleasing side. And I can't really control that in my students, but I can certainly address it in myself, and we can just notice if it's there and find some resources.
Well, and just letting them know, I think that this is a safe space to make mistakes. I don't know. I always like to try to think about myself as I think, or I tell people, especially parents of younger kids, I was like, look, I've taught 3 year olds, I've taught the whole spectrum. As long as you're basically being a kind and respectful person in here, there's not a lot that you can do in here that's going to shock or surprise or offend me. I have had small children laying on the floor screaming, I hate the violin. And spoiler alert, that child is now much older and still playing and loves the violin. It was just, being 4. So, I think letting it just being a safe place to be like, hey, if you're having a bad day, it's okay to come in and tell me that. I mean, I'm not qualified to give you an hour-long therapy session about it, but we can chat about it for a couple minutes and I can say like, wow, that's terrible or whatever. Or, yeah, that does sound really irritating what your friends did. And then we can play some scales. But I think just being a safe place for that.
And I think because I'm this kind of teacher too, the asking a lot of questions
Mm-hmm.
versus just telling students, it's giving them the opportunity. I care what you think too. This is not just about pleasing your teacher. This is about you developing as a learner, as a
Mm-hmm.
musician, as a human being with critical thinking skills. I think we can just have conversations about how all of that is important. I know there's some students who really freeze if I say, oh, should we make this sound like this emotion or that emotion, or like this are we going to picture this animal or that animal, and they sort of freeze, and I find myself saying like, oh, there's not a right or wrong answer. Or like if we ask them to, in a musical interpretation, it's like there's really not a wrong answer except choosing nothing, right? So I don't care what you pick. I think sometimes we just have to realize if a student's freezing when they're asked to make a choice, maybe they need permission that
Mm-hmm.
the goal is not to make us happy or guess the right answer to tell us, but that we're having a conversation and their voice is important. Those are some of the things that come to mind for me in the teaching world, at least.
And I also try, if if there is a secret right answer, I try to make it not a secret.
Right.
Or I try not to do the thing where I'm asking questions and I'm leading them to a particular thing. Um, I'll say something like the note was out of tune. Was it high or low? Not did you hear anything funny?
Right.
How about that second thing? Like, I'll just say that's that. But so I try to say it, like you said, it's genuinely an open ended. There is not a secret right answer. Like, whatever you come up with is fine. So I think I try not to like set those type of like leading traps for them because then they can trust it when I'm actually asking a question.
Right. And certain personalities will get very stressed that they're supposed to give the right answer, or the teacher will be, or the parent or caregiver will be displeased with them. And I think just noticing those tendencies in our kids,
Mm-hmm.
then it can be really helpful. Just tell them what it is if you have an answer.
Yeah.
And then, if there's a genuine question, then ask them a question, and then they might feel more, relaxed to start interacting with us
Yeah,
that
I'm
way.
not a parent myself. I heard the best quote about this summer. It was Christina Koch, the astronaut who went up on Artemis 2, and she was giving a great
Mm-hmm.
interview, and she was like, I'm not a parent, but I'm an ally. So I'm gonna start stealing that from her. And so I'm not a parent, but I'm an ally, and I think that the more kids are doing things for themselves and not because an adult says it's right or wrong. I mean, again, we have to give some sort of structure for them to grow up in our society. I think that can be really, really helpful. And I think also, particularly if we have our own high standards, which great to have, and visions of a child playing at whatever level, again, wonderful to have. But I think making sure you have a teacher where you trust the process. And if teacher says, don't worry about intonation this week, go work on your bow, like follow that assignment, and trust that, I no, I'm not going to let your kid play out of tune forever. But I think just making sure that you're in an environment where you yourself trust the teacher that you've hired to do the job and to trust their pacing. And that will help your child have trust in it too.
Right. Exactly. Well, it's been fun to kind of think back and revisit. And we've just, sort of had a conversation about it. We hope sparked some ideas and some food for thought for those of you who are listening. If you did not hear our whole series last year, we had at my website, suzukitriangle.com/perfectionist. There's the list of all the different topics we talked. We had an episode for parents and caregivers. We had an episode for teachers. We had an episode about supporting students and some overview. So there's a number of episodes there that you could kind of dip in and get more of our thoughts on any of those topics, or maybe you go on a deep dive of your own and look for resources. And this has sparked some curiosity that you want to explore. But uh, a very interesting topic to dig into. I feel like an endless topic to dig into. Claire, any thoughts before we go today that you want to end with?
I would just say if any more listeners have recommendations on books or things to read, we love to do that. I have a sneaking suspicion you haven't heard the last about this from us, so we're definitely probably going to continue the conversation. So we're happy to hear from you. I think I think the more that we spend time thinking about like how we are and why we are and how we show up in the world, for ourselves and for our students and for our children, I think that's exactly the type of thing that the world needs all the time, but especially right now.
Yes, exactly. And then I would just say we've said this a lot between the two of us, and I want to leave you with this thought again. This is a long-term process. You hear about the two of us talking about how we are unwinding and thinking about these things as grown adults. And if your child has these tendencies, again, we're not labeling anybody, but we see these tendencies in our kids. It's not a one-time conversation or even a one-year conversation. This is just a long-term, how do we work with ourselves as humans conversation. So we have to be very patient, and I think trust that process too. That not easily solvable, but important to be. thinking about and aware of, and continuing to look for support for ourselves if we're parents, or for ourselves if we're the individual who has these tendencies. So we're in there with you, thinking about it and thinking about how we support ourselves and support those in our lives who need it. So thank you for listening, and we'll look forward, like Claire said, any feedback you have or ideas for further research or conversation that you're interested in, please reach out to us. I'll put a link in the show notes to both of our information, and would both love to hear from you.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks,
Claire, for being here. Before we go today, we would love to invite you to share your feedback, your insights, and anything you would like to add to this conversation. You can reach out to Claire or I on Instagram or through email, and we'd love to keep carrying this conversation forward and keep learning together as a community. As Claire said towards the end of our conversation today, I'm sure you haven't heard the last about this topic from us, and we hope that we get to hear more from you as well. I'm looking forward to being back here with you next week to share a couple of practice tips from a parent who wants to share what he's learned along the way that he wished he had known from the start while supporting his child in music lessons. I'll look forward to being back here with you then. In the meantime, happy practicing, everyone, and take very good care.